I was unwell for this week, so I couldn't prepare properly. So this is going to be a bit more informal. All the things I did a couple of weeks ago, I dug in, and I haven't been able to implement it properly. But we're just going to deal with it and plow through. Okay, a lot of the things about Gemini is quite simple to understand, and it's actually very well articulated by founding members of this protocol community. So I recommend the Gemini.circumlunar.space as a way of really getting to grips, and it's pretty much that just sort of nullifies a lot of the value of me presenting today. And does anybody have an awareness of Gemini? Okay, it's in effect positioned in a way to be very minimal in terms of its expectations of what's needed for somebody to request a document and to have it sent to them. It relies on TLS for a lot of the heavy aspects in terms of making sure things are being done as an encrypted transfer. And this project was sort of born by the renaissance around the Gopher protocol, which was in the early 90s seen as the way in which people would interact on the internet. And for a lot of historical reasons, HTTP grew out as the successor, in part because of the extensibility built into it. With regards to the extensibility, obviously that has created a very strange, peculiar feedback loop, which will irrevocably alter how we behave because of the social, technological aspects around this. One of the things when deliberating on this talk was to try and relate it to what people do individually as well as collectively and on a more society level. And the way I sort of thought of it was in terms of intermediaries who are in effect agents who have a function to sort of deal with things. So for instance, back in the day, in the age of mercantilism, Brussels City was ring-fenced with a big wall. So we have the city is marked by Porte de Namur and various things like that, where you would have people checking for goods and charging a fee. So that would be an example of an intermediary. But obviously, when it comes to relying on technology, we are still bound by specific rules which permit us to do things, which prevent us from doing things, and people who exist on a voluntary or haphazard way to make things happen or not happen. With regards to the internet, I'm of the age where, for instance, Napster emerged as a way of using peer-to-peer as a method of circumnavigating the way in which the music industry functioned, and disintermediate the music right holders in a very specific way, so that they weren't dependent on the traditional media ways of acquiring media. When it comes in terms of HTTP, we've become dependent on very specific modes of doing things and interacting. So we've gone through various things. In some ways, things have been articulated with Web 2.0, for instance. And just how we function on the internet, it means that there's a lot of complexity built into our everyday interactions with computers. When I visit a website, whole streams of JavaScript come through, and in my personal opinion, a lot of that is gubbins, which is to disempower me on some aspect, because I'm obliged to give up very specific information about myself and my behaviors, and the extensibility which is built into the HTTP protocol means that that it's difficult to circumnavigate it. It's for instance, just looking at things like NoScript or UMatrix as a way of empowering myself to say, hey, I don't want you to have this information about me, or I don't want this information hitting my computer. I only want this specific bit. That's getting harder and harder. And there are institutional powers encouraging this because they have direct financial gain from providing those services, but they're also sort of, let's say, political things in terms of enforcing that. And so, for instance, there's a kind of constant war in terms of everything with software providers for making sure that things happen. So, for instance, it's very hard in the Libre software world to keep going and provide a fully functional equivalent to proprietary tools. It's very hard to, for instance, have a functioning environment on a mobile phone which is fully Libre. And just sort of taking back to Gemini, I found it was very empowering because the requirements are so small that and the Markdown format is correspondingly very small. So it means that I can really get going on getting the information, having it presented in a very clear way, and that means that the complexity is at the end of how I want to make things bespoke and match my requirements and workflows. I went through the IceCat, the package definition for generating IceCat, for instance, which is the more Libre equivalent of Firefox, which doesn't have some of the more proprietary or less free things. And as you see, there's just, is that legible, or should I make it larger? I'll make it a bit larger. So just these are a range of different inputs, and as you see, it's rather considerable. Here, for instance, you've got Rust, you've got the package manager Rust within it, you've got CLang, LLM, VM, Perl, Node, Python, Python 2, and various other things. And just going down further, these are all the complexities just to deal with. These are the packages and the languages required for building this browser. Here are all of the various requirements for dealing with things. And this creates a very high load for being able to, for instance, improve your browser behavior, and for being able to understand what's going on in the tooling environment. And it means that there's a kind of level of complexity which is very difficult. And obviously with say client environments in HTTP, you can have even more complexity with other things such as Chrome, which would have its own viewpoints and various things like that. I just want to compare this with Lagrange, which is, and this is the entire package definition for a GUI Gemini browser. So you've got OpenSSL, which I suppose is managing the TLS aspects. You've got PCRE, which is handling the regex, zlib, which is doing compression. And obviously, because it's a small project, it's easier to handpick more modern equivalents and tools. And yeah, and that's it. There's no convoluted install instructions because it's focused on minimalism, and minimalism is very advantageous with trying to create bespoke and understandable environments for you to operate in. I thought I'd also compare the these are the dependencies required for the static site builder Hugo. and as you can see, they're quite numerous, and I'm quite sure that a lot of these dependencies have other dependencies, and here is an equivalent in Gemini, which is done in Rust. When, as you can see, it's much smaller in terms of what is expected. There's got a Rust TLS. You've got Tokyo, which would be dealing with the kind of understanding the data, mime guess, log, getops, and config parser, URL. It's very simplified, and I'm sure it'd be much more feasible for going, hey, what is going on below this and yeah. So this is a browser. This is one of the more fancier ones because often they are very lean and very small, but you know it looks nice and fine. And one of the design decisions in Gemini was to say, hey, stop using CSS and all of that gubbins. Just send the text and leave it up to the client level for making an interpretation. And I press here and I press 2, and voila, I'm at a new site. I can I can just get an idea of various things. The actual core definition doesn't have any expectations of images, but because the power distance of Gemini is very low, because you can just do whatever you want, and people can either go along with it, use it, or they just use other tools, then that's very, very nice and interesting. The there's I thought I'd show you a this is Bollocks, I hope I pronounced that correctly, which is it's a browser which is written in Bash. And let's see, yeah, it's about 1650 lines of code, and you try and build a browser in serving HTTP content which can do that. It's nigh on impossible, and as you can imagine, there is a lot of things which are just done for configuration. So here you've got things about timeouts, maximum directing, which is 5. That's the given expectation with Gemini, that you should be redirecting everywhere. This is a community which is really prioritizing the user and their autonomy to do things without their privacy or security being impacted. And so yeah, you've got various keys for moving forward, various points, user inputs. Let's see, I'm just going to try and find there's a good reference for the kind of I'm not sure handshake is but the different contexts. But yeah, it's no harm you just having a quick scan of this anyway. Yeah. Sorry about this. Okay, well, there's sort of 6 main tranches of of the of how to deal with things. There's 10, which is to deal with input. You have a very simple way of inputting a 1,000-odd character search query, and it's so minimal that you can't do multi-line text input. But it's very feasible, for instance, to write something in a Gemtext file and pushing it somewhere, and obviously just sending a link saying, "Hey, look over there. That's my response to you." Gemini is a very decentralized focus. It means that, for instance, it doesn't have interaction which HTTP has, but that's fine. This isn't meant to be a solution for all use cases. It has very defined trade-offs and tries to work in a kind of slow internet facet where it's more deliberative. Sort of reflecting on this as a philosophy, I've tried to imagine that things like HTTP has the kind of reflexiveness which, for instance, you would want from a hospital emergency response unit, whereas Gemini is more of the clinician who's working in a more defined area and where they're working in a more methodical way of dealing with things. You have 20, which would be, hey, it's come to you, here is the content, and you have things, the other criteria numbers have mainly focused on, hey, there's a problem with this, or hey, this service isn't available, or hey, can I have a certificate, please? And that, just the ability to say, here is my public key. I would like this information, and the system goes, yes, you can. Given that public key, here is what you've wanted, and it's not hanging. It's not the server is not communicating with Facebook or all these other vendors and intermediaries. It's just going, there you go, and the footprint you have is much smaller because of this. Somebody, I'm sure, can do very dastardly things with logs, but it's a lot harder than compared to things which you'd have in HTTP. And one of the major problems with HTTP these days is the fact that it's very hard to be able to distinguish between who is an honest supplier of information, who is dishonest supplier of information, because of the leaks. And you don't really have, when you're making a search query or you're seeing a link which you're making an evaluation of, you've got no idea how that person on the other end is going to treat you, and there's so much convenience built into the modern experience on the internet that it makes it very hard for other people to be trusted in a very classic way. And one of the things I like about the Gemini community is that there are enough. The kernel of expectations is so small that it's easier to trust people in the blind, and I think that's the type of thing which I want to be with. And I found the Gemini community to be very informative. A quite interesting, open-minded group of people. That could change, obviously, if it mainstreamed as a protocol, but that's at least a good starting point where various things, and these people are used to working and behaving in a very decentralized way and operating very cleanly. This was one of the things I did when I had more time, of creating an impression of what HTTP is about. It's this kind of convoluted mess where, it's just madness and stuff, and it's the protocol which is mad, not the person which made the graphic. Does anyone spot the 2001: A Space Odyssey reference? It's the craft. I've done more pictures. I'll save them for the Q&A maybe, but yeah, it's yeah, I like the protocol in terms of how you interact with people. You can still do things in a dynamic way. One of the expectations is that you just serve the files, and then you're supposed to say, and then it's finished. There are teething problems amongst the community where not enough people are actually saying it's finished and it's done. But a legitimate use case would be, for instance, to create a kind of an ongoing feed of information. So there are, for instance, people have a kind of forum-based things where you have a running loop of various things being served. Right, hang on. I thought I would give a small example of a community which is experimenting with using Gemini as a format for writing their issue queues. And so, for instance, they use things for solving different problems with. So they just articulate things in this form. Maybe that's just a good way of dealing with some of the design aspects. So, for instance, you have the hashtag, and you have up to 3 of them, and they denote hierarchy with headers. You've got stars, which can serve as bullet points. You have quote blocks. You have quotes, and you have link points, and those are pretty much the core in terms of how people express themselves and interconnects their thoughts and other content types and service environments. I had some fun by doing a parser which sort of grabs those things in order to generate various do a recursion through these boards so that I could provide information. So, for instance, I'm just going to highlight from there. From just identifying the item as a repo downloaded on a computer, I could then go, hey, get blame, who's been writing coding concerning this document? So, oh, maybe I'll make that larger. Hang on. So just that line with the history line, that was just an example of taking within a dirty loop, being able to provide things and making so I suppose I like to think that the gawp command is convenient enough to understand. So what I did was find through a folder directory, do a ls, and then pipe that through into another environment. Maybe this is a good time to. Here is a toy. Here is a toy parser of the Gemtext form, and I've used it as a starting point for generating matrices to demarcate what each line is. Gemini format runs on a line-by-line basis, and one of the most beautiful things about it is that the Gemtext style, you can work out what the line is by the first 3 characters, which, as you can imagine, with all the complexities in the HTML format, which is nigh on impossible. And obviously, the HTML format's made even more convoluted by commercial requirements to hide a lot of the content, confuse how it's set up, and all the myriad complexities of different frameworks and various things. So this is a parser which identifies whether something is, if it's got one header, it's one hashtag, it's a main header, 2 secondary, 3 got the bullet point there. You've got the equals and greater than symbol. That references a URI. You have the greater than sign, which is the quote, and then the backticks to represent a block quote. And so, for instance, you can then do various things, and there's just some from just having done this. The main complexity was being able to differentiate between a content within a text block. So you have various switches going on or off depending on various things, and you're adding things into an array and working on it then. But it's quite easy to get at that content, and once you're at that stage, then obviously you can be exporting it to anything. And for instance, I've done experiments where I've moved the Gemtext format into an org mode format, which is pretty much switching hashes for asterisks. And at that point, I've exported things into text documents to generate PDFs or anything, because obviously org mode has enough operability with other things. There are people who've built parsers for dealing with various things, but this protocol's only been in existence since mid 2019, so it's still in early days. I think that in terms of the low amount of cost for dealing with things is quite marvelous. I'm going to pull up a I'm going to pull up something which yeah. There we go. So this is a web server, which is this is the definition file for the operating system, where a web server is using the static site generator agate, and it's just at the bottom is so pretty much all I have to do just to make it more interesting is to make sure SSH is available, TLS is available, and certs, but some of that could just be based upon the base core of the operating system environment. And so yeah, PPP. Yeah, hang on. There we go. So yeah, I declare a service, which is a DHCP client service type, service agate service type. Here is the configuration. Here is my host name, content, certs, keys, and some context about the open SSH keys and where the public keys are for interacting with. And this is done in Geek, so this will exist in the same form if this is really pinned, and I can just present that to other people. It's full on automation, and it's like that. It's just as simple, if not slightly simpler in more conventional operating systems, and yeah, and then I just write in a very simple file, which is the simplest Markdown you need, and you could have a git hook which says and redo your server. And as you can imagine, there are differing simple ways in which to have sort of RSS style feeds and being able to download and interconnect. One of the things which intrigues me is to use something like Gitterlite, where you'd be looking after repositories in a very simplified environment, and generating Gemini information about the repository in a very simplified way, and being able to direct users to other sites in other protocols, for instance, should anything more complicated be needed. But for me, this is very good for dealing with workflows and being able to really sort of keep things simple. As some of the people who in this room who know me, I complicate things and always making things very difficult. There's nodding and various things, but you know, I like to have something which I can get in my head, and in some ways that this is why, for instance, I really liked the Lua as a language, because it has a very simple structure. You can really go through the documentation and you can go and use your imagination. But similarly, they're also higher expectations the more demanding you want things to be doing with. But at least the language is understandable, or the protocol and the Markdown in Gemini's instance. And you'll be able to really focus on what you need and what needs to happen for you to achieve your goals. And as someone who's done a little bit of coding, that shouldn't be too big of a hassle. I think the simplicity of being able to see what other people have written content-wise and grab that, or at least reverse engineer other people's triumphs, is very useful. And I'm optimistic, having interacted with people in the Gemini community regarding what they can be achieving over time, and I hope to be participating to at least my capacities and flow. But yeah, how am I doing for time?
It's 1:45.
Okay, when did I start?
1:15. So I've left for half an hour.
Okay, there you go. You said it'd be more ranting if I'd prepared more. Yeah. Let's see. Let's get some of the more pictures I did. There we go. This is. Could anyone notice the 2001: A Space Odyssey stuff on this one? No. Okay, but yeah, for me this was more of the kind of feel of Gemini, this kind of free floating, rather than the first diagram, which was her leaving the outer space limits, and feeling in the story it's about having an elephant weighing on your chest, which for me that's sort of what the HTTP experience often is. That I always feel like there's a pressure and a force against me, and yeah, I can see this interplay of different media as a way of feeling that. Okay, any questions from people?
So am I right that Gemini is, because I thought it was quite old, but I heard you say it's.
No,
Gemini
Gemini is in effect some people who are infused about Gopher, which has been around since the early 90s, and they've sort of saw what was useful about HTTP, and saw what they liked about Gopher, and tried to come up with something in the middle. And Gemini, for instance, is a play on the spacecraft technology, which was between whatever the first one, Beagle, and Apollo, which is the one which obviously landed on the moon. That it's Gopher's wonderful in itself, but because it doesn't have some of the things regarding encryption, then it means that a lot of the use case, the justifiable use case domains are less useful, and there's a couple convoluted ticks to Gopher, which mean that it wouldn't be so useful. There's also Finger, which seems interesting, but the use case domain I could see are much more limited, because it's I'm sure other people can have better answers in terms of that. I instantly came across Gemini by looking into things around ActivityPub and Federation, and I was looking into Redis as an interface with regards to various things. I thought the database would be interesting, and somebody had come up with a Gopher extension for Redis, which seems fascinating, that you could have such a powerful NoSQL database, and you have the output shooting out into a very simplified text structure, which is a very kind of file orientated. Gemini is very useful for protocols. Thank you for giving me a prompt. So, for instance, this is somebody's attempt at using the Lobster RS as a mirror. I'm not sure it's got search functionality, but for instance, there is this is for instance, this is somebody developed a protocol for Reddit. So for instance, I go J. Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, but so for instance, this is a service somewhere out there where someone goes, hey, I want to search on Reddit, and output this in Gemini, so you can click on comments and do various things. There's a YouTube crawler. For some reason, it didn't work today. That's one of the problems with this, is that it's still very in the hobbyist territory. But I really think there's going to be some very interesting commercial applications of this, increasing over time, once people sort of feel like, hang on, there's not going to be the gubbins of all RSS and convoluted coding and various things. I've got to feel more safe interacting here, and I'm going to get a very bespoke service. So people put on Android and for iPhones all these apps and various things, and you could actually just say, here is a simplified browser for Gemini. Oh, and here's this URI, and it's going to serve everything you need, and voila. And there will be people who will develop their own client browser to serve a very specific product, and they'll present things which might be accessible in other browsers, but it's going to do it in a very simplified way.
So how would you say, if I compare the two, I trying to wrap my head around it. I've understood that, so that there's no markup, no styling, because CSS is thrown out.
Yes.
There's no input forms.
There are input forms, but it's very one-line based.
Yeah, so it's really. I heard you say, I don't know if you can search something on the Reddit page. So it's. Really
Yes. The so I'll go up. Yeah. So I had typed in the Gemini protocol, but if there's another one. Yeah, I do. This is the search bit at the top. You really can't see it because of the black screen.
It's not built in the site.
No, you can have dynamic sites which serve CGI. It's a bit kind of Perl late 90s, but I'm sure if somebody came up with something more fluid and various things, but that's fine. And one of the things I've noticed from the mailing list, which is an excellent mailing list, is you have people come in and go, wow, this is amazing, and then they start wanting to do try and push past the frontier, which is certainly I'm guilty of this constantly in terms of trying to go beyond, and as you can imagine, there are differing degrees of pushback of like, no, that's save that for HTTP, don't confuse things, no one's going to do that, and various. But the
that was actually my bottom line question. How would you position the two next to each other? Because I don't see Gemini replacing HTTP.
It doesn't have to. It can complement it. So, for instance, this could kill a lot of blog post writing just straight out of the bat. I've already given an example of people who are trying to use Gemtext as a way of avoiding GitHub issue pages. And so because this is a protocol, because it's got such a minimal kernel as a protocol, it really gets to, in terms of community, in terms of what puts on top, and so people could, for instance, use a protocol to complement some of the shortcomings of Gemini and having it in an integrated way, and it just depends on the flow and the direction and the interaction. So it alters behavior, but sort of one of the things I've been feeling with discussing of intermediaries is that our behavior should be changing, and we should be focusing on community knowledge and individual knowledge in which the infrastructure is understandable, accessible, and can be improved based upon specific requirements rather than some abstract requirements developed, let's say, ultramontane, which is a very middle-age reference. But yeah, you can even serve audio in this. That was one of the Lagrange inputs was a minimal audio player. So and people should be reaching for things like MPV for loading materials, which is a specialized tool rather than all of the complicated tools and expectations built into a more mainstream HTTP browser. And yeah, like I said, people have found ways of playing with the frontier of various things. And if I had more time, I would have gone through that. And you have people who use their public keys to have an ongoing relationship with a service, like a session cookie equivalent, but it's just based upon, can I come in? Yes, you can. And from there, the server could have a historical build in terms of expectations. There's one which I think is about growing plants, so it's probably a kind of Tamagotchi gardening kind of thing where you go on and you water a plant and various things like that, and you come back and your plant's been growing. And anybody else? Okay, well, yeah, and yeah, big props to Caroline on the moon. Good.
Thank you.